Okay, good. Right, so we're going to go through a case. I'll give you some hints and tips as we go through. But we're going to start off with this company is called Always Fresh. They're a subsidiary of a £30 billion company. So they're a small part of a larger company. They make deodorants, and when I say deodorants, they have sprays, they have roll-ons, and they have sticks.
Okay.
So 3 types of deodorants. Sales have grown very well over the last few years in North America. They've done really well, and they're ready to take their products to a new country.
Okay.
And so what I'd like you to think about is how you would go about finding what that country is or what those countries are. So how would you rank one country above another? So take a couple of minutes and just, have a think.
Okay, great. So I think logically, I guess we would start looking into the big kind of obvious moves. So we start to like the biggest economies. So we start looking at China, perhaps. As a North American company, I suppose the move to the UK would be fairly seamless. Similarly, if we look at countries such as Japan, they're fairly big market currently. Or if we look at, we're trying to hit all the big continents. So if we look at perhaps Brazil, and finally, how about significant population sizes, also India. Now we have the big ones, so I guess now we start looking into population size, I suppose, would be the next logical step, start to look at consumers. So if we look at China, that is roughly, I think, currently 3 billion, perhaps, 3 billion, I believe. Billion.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
So what you're doing here is fine. What
Okay.
you're doing is jumping down to the details.
Okay.
At
So
this
it's just
level,
rank.
just focus on the structure. So you're saying that population is a driver or potential driver of revenue. What you also want to think about is what are the other drivers.
Okay.
So what I don't want you to do at this stage, and what is too early to do at this stage, is to dive right down into the figures. You almost want to leave that to the end till you've got your structure, or your equation, listed out.
So if we start looking at, so if we look at into specifically the drivers, we have population size, they're within the competitors of the already existing companies, what market share they hold, the size of said market. Those are kind of the main drivers, but if we kind of go further, I guess we could start looking at political drivers, their current economies, and etc. Do you think it'd be useful to kind of maximize all the drivers to go into as much detail as possible, or similarly to the other ones to keep a little bit back?
Good question. So at this stage, I would focus on, if I was in your position, I would be creating a Macy diagram at this stage. So I was already thinking you've got population listed and you've got market size listed.
Yeah.
Now those two things are clearly related, but not the same.
Yeah.
And so you might want to start thinking about the big boxes.
Okay.
So even if you just, literally just write out, population, market share, price. And there may be a whole load of questions that you do want to ask about politics, about supply chain, about transportation costs or whatever. Those are fine to ask.
Great.
In this case, you won't get much of a response, but that's fine. You've asked the questions. The interviewer would expect you to do so, and they would say we don't have any information on that, so you can ignore it. Okay. So just draw out a few. You get the main things into big boxes, and if there's any subsets, just write them down.
Great. So if I start writing out these, we got population, market size, and perhaps some sort of comparative cost of launching in that particular country?
That's a really good point. However, for the purposes of this, let's just assume that all the costs are the same.
The same. Okay.
So we're going to make that simpler for you. So,
okay, great.
Yeah.
So we'll look at their competitors even, sorry.
Good.
And I guess because the market share kind of deck is directly related to the competitors, I guess it'd be kind of a subset, perhaps?
Yeah, so all the competitors are going to have a market,
of course.
Percentage.
So, yes.
So yeah, you can link those two.
Okay.
But that's fine. So you've got the big boxes.
The big ones, yeah.
And that's fine. So you've got population, market size, you've got the competitors. There's one big box you're missing that would allow you to calculate the revenue that would come from these things.
Not the market size.
Nope.
No.
So okay, so I'm selling you pancakes and
the cost, the price that we're selling the product, of course.
Yeah. So you possibly assumed that it was going to be the same in every country.
Every country, yes.
It's my job as an interviewer to tell you it's not
okay.
the same in every country. So we'll give you some,
Great.
We'll give you some information on that.
So I got the big ones.
Okay. Now let's assume let's pretend that we have a load of information about a country. What would you do to tell me whether that country was worth a good investment or not, getting our products out there?
So I guess I'd start looking at the best possible outcomes that these can provide. So what we're looking at is obviously the bigger the population, the more likely, the higher the revenue we're going to get. The market size, I guess it could go back and forth. Obviously, if there's a bigger market for it, there's obviously more likely to be competitors. I mean, that'll tend to change slightly country to country, but we'd want some sort of generally a fairly large market size.
Good.
With, I suppose, a healthy number of competitors. If there's too low, we'd know there's a reason that there is no competitors, and too high, and it's going to be not profitable for us. Similarly, I suppose price. Is there any particular, what's the specific reasoning behind why we'll be selling the product at different prices? Okay, so that's a really good question, and the answer is that in this case, we're going by what the market pricing for these is in that country. Okay.
So in Japan, deodorant tends to be more expensive. In Brazil, it tends to be cheaper, and so we'll give you some figures on that.
Great. So I guess in terms of price, I'd start looking at who has the highest side, so we can maximize our income. Okay,
that's reasonable. Okay, so that's a really good breakdown. In terms of the process, you took it's important to start off with the big boxes.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Before,
yes.
Yeah. So the big obvious things, and of course, what's obvious, when you're reading a book, isn't obvious when you're sat in an interview situation. And there isn't a single interview that I've done where the person hasn't left and then gone, oh no, I should have said.
This,
But that's fine. The one thing that you did miss that I think is very important is before we get to this stage is for you to reiterate the problem back to me.
Okay.
So for you to say, okay, so from what I understand, this is a US company that's done well in North America and is seeking to go elsewhere, and really to clarify what I'm looking for. So, is revenue really what you're looking for, or is it profits, or is it market dominance? Over what period are we talking?
Okay.
And a good way of encompassing all of this is simply to say, what is the client's goal? What would they like? And in this case, you can take North America as kind of a benchmark. If they're selling 350 million in North America, then something, approaching that, it's going to be difficult because the North American market's so big, but something sort of 50%, 20% of that is going to be, not bad over 2 or 3 years, I guess.
Great.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to give you some handouts. So we'll start with handout A, and I'd really at this stage really like you to say what you think is important here in terms of maximising the revenue for the company. What countries are looking good, I guess.
Great. Okay. So yeah, if we start looking at, we have the population of Brazil, we can see that that's currently the highest. However, they don't actually have the highest deodorant usage, so it's probably be more useful to look at something like Japan, who, even though they have a slightly lower population, the deodorant usage is significantly higher. 6 million, that's quite significant. I'd start looking at, I suppose, kind of trading off what the company would they would rather, which market they would rather in terms of continent, I suppose, if we start looking at the population.
Okay, that's a really good question. I can tell you from the customer's perspective is that geography isn't a problem. So,
Great.
So we're just going to assume that there are no distribution costs. There's no legal barriers to entry.
Great.
There's no issues with trade or whatever.
Of course.
So we can assume that's frictionless.
Okay, well, based on a purely statistical point of view, Japan does seem to be the safest bet based on just the population and deodorant usage. I don't think we could come to any other conclusion.
Good, okay, good. Okay, so typically with something like this, you want to make your life easy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to make it too easy. So you could say, I'm just going to focus on Japan because it has the biggest the deodorant usage. You want to have a couple of backups because it may be that the next slide I give you says that in Japan they give away deodorant free of charge.
Right.
In which case, suddenly Brazil comes into the market. Okay. Okay, so that's fine. So you focused on the main thing. There's a bit of a red herring put in here, which is they show you the whole population, and a lot of people would say I'm going to use that as the basis for calculation. Yes. And a lot of people will get tied up in, maybe we can convince the people who aren't using deodorant to buy our deodorant.
Of course.
But actually, if they're not using deodorant now, unless you've got a magic wand, then you're completely different to all the competitors, which you're not. So you need to keep it simple, which you did. You focused on Brazil and Japan. If it was me in that position, I'd possibly include Germany as well, but it does depend how good your maths is. Okay. So focusing on Brazil and Japan for the time being it's fine because they're by far the biggest leaders in terms of market sizing. Okay, good. So I'm going to push that over there.
Great.
This is handout B, which, as you can see, is the average price of different types of deodorant. So what can you tell me from this handout?
So first of all, I would start to look at obviously the highest price, which is currently Japan, and I suppose I would also look at Brazil, which is actually significantly lower than some of the other competitors. However, I would also look at how much the average price varies based on the same country. So with Brazil, the difference is significant between, I would assume, competitors based on the fact that the average is so different. I would also look at what the difference is. Can I ask whether we are providing roll-on, spray, stick, or a combination of all three?
So you're providing all three of them?
All three of them?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would start to look at how they differentiate, which one perhaps provides the most, could be as useful information.
Good.
So if I was looking at Japan, I would see that their roll-ons have currently the highest average price. Similarly, I think I would also look at comparison their spray and stick are also amongst the highest. So I think that, along with their population, was a fairly good choice. Good. However, Brazil, despite their high population and deodorant usage, all three are not. They're amongst the lower price currently.
Okay.
So would I be logical to make perhaps a revised progression? Possibly,
yeah. I mean, one thing you could do is, how would you go about seeing whether it was worth you revising or narrowing down or changing your mind about things?
Well, based on this, I would look at the fact that yes, Japan has almost, other than the UK for spray deodorants, has the highest roll-on and stick deodorant, so I would definitely keep that. Whereas for Brazil, considering all three of theirs are lower, I might consider moving to the UK. However, we have to look back at the fact that their population is so much lower.
Good.
So perhaps your original pick of Germany was a good pick, as it's quite mid-ranged, has the third highest population usage, and seems like a significantly safer bet than Brazil.
Okay, good. Now, it's not okay, that's good. So you've noticed something in the slide, you've referred back to the other slide, you've knocked the UK out quite rightly because it's really low percentage of or number of deodorant users. There's no need to choose between them at this stage, so you can just still keep Japan and Brazil. And I would also say, although this looks like it's taken a big dip compared to Japan, actually if you compare it to the others, it's not too far off the average. So I wouldn't discount Brazil simply because it's they charge 15% less for their deodorants. So at this stage you're doing fine. You've got the three up there: Japan, Brazil, Germany. That's important because a fewer number means that your calculations, because at the end of this obviously you're going to be doing some calculations, your calculations are going to be a lot simpler. And the other thing that makes it simpler is to do rounding, and we can talk about that later. So instead of multiplying 89.9, you're going to be multiplying 90. Okay, so I'm going to give you handout C.
Great.
Which is the key competitors by the market. Which out of the shortlist, Germany, Brazil, and Japan that you've come up with, which of those markets looks most attractive on the basis of this for us to break into?
Well, at the moment, I would say potentially Germany, based on the fact that of these they have the lowest amount of competing brands.
Yep.
We might question why that is. Maybe the deodorant usage is a bit less, but the population is lower. But it seems that there's clearly still a high market compared to the population of non-users to their actual users.
Okay, good.
Secondly, I would then look at Japan, and that they have two rather large market shares, and then 10 other brands sharing about half of the other market share. So that would be kind of another one where we might have to dominate our way to at least be amongst the top three, which would what we'd be wanting. Whereas Brazil, they have one who has at least, I'd say, roughly 60% of the market share, and then the other 15 brands. So we'd find it perhaps quite difficult to push their current top leader out of the market.
What, as an estimate, after say 2 or 3 years, what do you think the market share that Always Fresh could command in each of these countries? What would you guesstimate each of these countries with 3 years in? What percentage market share do you think we might achieve in Germany, Brazil, and Japan?
Well, moving in immediately, if we start looking at a North American company like that, places like Japan may be slightly less, or slightly more resistant to
good point.
Moving into the fact that it's quite a different culture.
Focus on this though. So you're right.
Of course.
Good point about the culture. Focus on the numbers first though.
So looking at the numbers based on the fact that there are so many means that dominating a high market share maybe would be quite difficult, based on the fact that people are currently using a significant proportion of brands. Similar to Brazil, it seems like a significant proportion of the population who uses deodorant are committed to Penitta, so it might be quite difficult to command more of a market share taking away their existing companies. Germany seems maybe slightly easier. There's a significantly higher amount of competitors, therefore it seems like the consumers are less interested in potentially just using one type and be more open to changing to the Always Fresh.
Okay, so going back to the question, so estimate the percentage market share that you think that we could command after 3 years, say, in each of those
After
markets.
3 years, so I say out of Germany, based on their average market share, I'd say roughly 20%, I would assume. Brazil, I would say with heavy investment could likely, I would think, move in amongst these other 15 brands to say perhaps, I'd say 15% with heavy investment, just based on the fact that there are currently 16 other brands around this area and these are already a well-established brand. Japan, I would again estimate perhaps 10%, maybe even less.
Okay.
Based on the fact that once again there's 10 and you have 2 who are kind of sharing the higher proportion of market share.
Okay, good. Okay, so so I'm going to give you a bit of feedback about the thinking. So what you did is absolutely fine. You started to think about what percentage market share, and that's really important to be driven by the numbers, because remember, at the end of the day, you're going to be calculating the potential revenue for each of these countries. So you've got 3 countries, there's going to be an equals and a dollar sign and whatever that is. And to get there, you obviously need the percentage market share that we're going to have, Always Fresh is going to have. So that's fine, that's great in terms of the structure. In terms of your assumption, though, that fewer competitors means an easier ride, it's actually the other way around.
Okay.
More competitors means an easy ride, because as with all bulk industries, if you can get a bigger piece of the market share, it means that you can negotiate lower prices, that you can negotiate better deals with supermarkets, your distribution, your supply chain. You can really hammer them down because you've got more muscle. If it's a highly fragmented market and you've got lots of players, it's a lot easier to get in, muscle them aside, especially for a big American company with billions, part of a subsidiary of a £30 billion company. Talking someone like Unilever.
Of course,
so they're going to come in, they're going to hammer these small players with a big marketing campaign, with tying up with distributors, etc. Now, there's no reason why you should know that unless you've done a master's in marketing, which you haven't. So that's information either that I would give you, or information that I just wouldn't give you, and just see the calculations that came out in the end. The good thing about these case interviews is that there's no right answer. We're really just looking at how you structure the problem. But that's just a little bit of feedback on there. The final handout is deodorant user preferences. And so you've got your roll-ons, your sprays, and your stick. And is there anything interesting that jumps out about the markets that we've discussed?
Well, based on the fact that we be providing all 3 types, it'd be helpful, I suppose, to find one who uses all 3 somewhat equally, in that if we roll out all of our products, we'd want a similar kind of sales for all of them. So if we look at Brazil, they have the highest amount using the spray, and then a little bit, perhaps 20% roll-on, 20% stick. So we'd be fairly confident that all 3 of our products would do quite well within Brazil. However, Japan, highly on spray, high on stick, not so much on roll-on, so we could expect a significantly lower sales in terms of roll-on.
Okay, that's a good insight. Are there any other insights? So I want to go back to this slide, and I want you to think about what this split would mean for some of these, for our revenue.
Of course. So
we've got to go back to the money.
If we start looking at how much, say, Japan is selling in terms of roll-on, it's the highest, but they're selling the least. So we'd be taking a big hit there if we roll everything out and they're not actually spending as much. Similarly, for example, Brazil, even though, as you said before, they're doing quite modestly, doing okay. So the fact that they're doing quite similarly, I think it would be a fairly safe bet to say that all of the products here will accrue a fairly decent profit. Perhaps. And then similarly to Germany as well, perhaps the best in terms of they are all using about 20% of each, maybe 40% of spray. And again, they have quite a mid-range average price.
Good.
So we can estimate that, once again, that would do quite well.
Okay, good. Okay, that's fine. So your first point was around the split between products, and that's a reasonable point to make, actually. But the first thing you should always think of is the figures.
Money.
So the whole thing you say about politics or culture or whatever, it's always kind of push that towards the end of the interview. The key thing you want to be focused on is what's the revenue figure.
Okay.
And we can see by this skew that although the roll-on is quite highly priced in Japan, it's a very small percentage. So if we were going to work out our revenue, obviously with Japan we'd be, instead of talking about an average figure up here, we'd be talking about an average figure down here. So it makes making your life easier.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we've got some figures behind it. What I'd like you to do is actually do some basic calculations to work out what you think the most attractive market for us actually would be. So you can obviously refer to the handouts, and perhaps just talk me through what you're doing while you're doing it.
Great. Well, if we start with, let's say, Japan, do you think it would be best to have similar structural models for each different country I'd be comparing?
Makes sense to me.
That would make sense, yeah.
In an interview, they just wouldn't. They'd say whatever you want.
Whatever you want,
yeah.
okay.
But yeah, obviously.
Okay, so for example, if we start with Japan, I would say that with the population of, perhaps be more useful to say the population who actually uses said deodorant. Users, and then we can look at Japan is, say, if we look at rounding again to make it easier, we'll look at 90 million. The average price, now do you think it would be best to kind of round here and then, because you've obviously got 3 different products, so would it be best perhaps to add them together to kind of work out the price that you'd be selling all 3, or to individualize them and say what each thing you would think you'd be getting?
So what's going to make your life easiest?
Probably to round them and then add them all together.
If you can take an average price, give or take. The key, these two clearly go well together. So with Japan, it might be skewed, as we said, slightly lower. Obviously, in an interview situation, I wouldn't be talking you through this.
Of course.
You would point out that the roll-on is really quite low in Japan. However, the high price point means that this isn't that relevant, so you might take an average price.
Okay, so if we say Japan's, we call that, say, 250, we'll say that. And we'll also, in terms of the market size, I guess I would return to handout C, possibly. Great. So in terms of market size, we would look at how many competitors they have. So we've got 12 other competitors, and 12 other competitors, and in terms of the market size, we'd be looking at population of users, I suppose.
So you got the figure earlier.
Yeah.
And you said it, so that's actually the wrong word there. So you're talking about market share.
Even.
So it's the percentage of the market that you think that you can capture. Which is completely right. It's handout C, and you just need to make an estimate.
So yeah, going back to what you said earlier about the fact that perhaps more competitors would actually make, especially a big North American company, would be a lot easier, especially compared to these. We would be possibly looking at a, let's say, 25% market share. Okay. It's modest. And that's kind of the Japan market kind of mapped out. Good. It might even be easier just to, I guess, consider the first row as Japan. Great. And then it'd be perhaps easier to compare if we do that. And then similarly, if we look at Brazil, we can take a population of 80, let's say 83 as a round, or I think it's, I guess, 80.
Depends how good your maths is. If your math is good, then stick with the 83. But if it's not, then go for a nice round number.
Would over rounding come off negatively?
I personally would say 85. You know, if you can multiply 85 by something, then that's okay. If your math isn't great, then go for 80.
Okay, great. So that's fine. 85 sounds great. We'll look at the competitors. So we have 16 competitors, and once again, similarly, there's a significant amount of brands, and assuming we can out Panita, we're probably looking at least perhaps a 40% market share. And if we were to turn that back over, look at the average price of Brazil, we can put that somewhere around $2. And finally, if we look at Germany, that's 60 million population, a market share of, you could think roughly, that one might be a bit less because, as you said, there's quite a few main competitors. They're probably all fairly strong. They're all sharing a roughly 40 to 20%. So I think, once again, a modest 25% market size with 6 competitors. And if we were to estimate, would say perhaps a similar to Brazil, perhaps, if we were to look against how many people are using them, perhaps another 2. So there we go, got a breakdown of all the different populations, price, and then how what we need.
It's very lovely. So now I'd like you to tell me which country is the most attractive to us. So which country? The question is, which country should we launch in? So what do you do to get the estimated revenue for each country in whatever year?
Okay, well, I guess I would. So would it be best to do the maths for every country, or just the one I think is gonna?
I would. It depends how confident you are, but I would do the maths.
Of course, yes.
If you can do it, show that you can do it.
So if we're looking at the 2.5 of the 90 million, that's going to be 245 million, I believe. 90 million. This is where my maths goes away.
Okay. That's all right. Take your time.
225 million?
Excellent,
yes.
Well done.
Look at that, 225 million for here. So if we look at the revenue here at the end. So, and then that's kind of the revenue. I guess we take into account the market size.
Great.
As well.
So 225 million would be, 225 would be the size of the market as a whole. Yeah. But what you want to be doing is working out what percentage you're going to be getting.
We can command. So if we're looking at a quarter of 225 million, we're looking at 112, and then so about, say, 56.
Brilliant. Good. That's really
56. And now if we look at Brazil, we've got 2, and then we'll times that by the population, which is 85. So we've got here 170 million total. And then if we look at the 40%, we could make it a bit easier. If I look at that as 10%, 17 million times 4, that's going to be 68 million. 68 million?
So 2 times 85, 170.
And then
170,
17 million. That's going to be 47, 54, 60, 61, 68 million?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. 68 million, and then if we look at Germany, that's going to be 120 million total, and then if we take a quarter of that, that is going to be 30 million.
Brilliant.
So based on this, I would say that Brazil, being that it's 68 million, currently the highest,
Good.
I would definitely recommend Brazil.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay, so you need to brush up on your math a bit.
Course.
Yeah, you've got to practice that stuff, but that's fine. Math, actually, people think it's the big thing. You can get your math fast. You do the psychometric tests. That's fine. So in an interview situation, I would ask you about lots of things. So I could ask you about your levels of confidence. I could ask you about other issues that you think might be a factor, other products that you think might sell well in these markets. I won't do that because I want to focus on this. So you've done really well in terms of the structure. You've got to the price. So there's a little bit of reminding to always focus on the revenue, but my key point is you break the problem down. You've got your equation, which you've got price, population, market share. You don't need the competitor's line, but you need it to work out your market share. Okay, and then you've got the final figures, and you can tell that Brazil looks like the nicest market based on the information that the assumptions that you've made. There's one thing that is missing in terms of the final revenue figure. Can you guess what that is?
I assume you're not talking about outgoings potentially, or costs? No, not costs.
Revenue. You're right to say that profit might be more important than revenue, but when I started this up, I was talking about revenue, so it's okay for you to talk about revenue. It's one of the things that possibly you might have clarified right at the beginning when you reiterated the problem to me. You might have said, are we talking about profit or revenue? But we're talking about revenue, so that's fine. What else might be missing here?
In terms of the revenue?
Estimated revenue.
My first thought might be it's other things like tax, but
that's fine. And we're assuming for these purposes that it's all the same. Okay, well let's look at it the other way around. From those figures, bear in mind we bring in 350 million in North America. Would it be worth us putting money into these markets?
It's not making if we're investing 350 million for assuming.
So we make 350 million in North America.
Oh, sorry, you make 350 million. So depending, I guess, on the cost of startup, and if we're only in North America, potentially not.
Okay.
I mean, there's a significant difference. It would be a lot of work. But I guess if you were looking to expand, this would probably be the best one.
Okay. What other ways might we achieve the outcomes we want, other than trying to launch by ourselves in a new market?
To perhaps either affiliate with a competitor, perhaps split. Move into multiple, I guess, new areas.
Good. Okay, so fine. So there's different models. You can have a partnership. You can just be a supplier. You can be an own label. You can build the factory there. There's lots of different options which we could talk about in more detail. The key thing, and you'll kick yourself here. How many items of deodorant do you buy a year?
Probably somewhere like, I suppose I'm a frequent gym user, so probably like 12 at most.
Oh wow!
Very most.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
At the very most.
So therefore,
how many? If we're looking at how many people buying per year as well, which we don't have figures for.
Correct.
So I guess we'd start to look at
how would you scale that? So what we've assumed here is that what have we assumed in terms of how often someone buys deodorant each year?
We've assumed that they buy it once a year.
Correct. So these figures are
obviously not that useful currently in their current state, I suppose.
So what you do is make an assumption. You
Yeah.
make an assumption that people buy 5, 6, 7 sticks of deodorant a year, and just multiply that.
Oh, okay.
So that your revenue then starts to look a lot more attractive.
More attractive.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I see.
So
for
50 would come up to somewhere, I don't know, 700 million.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So if we look at like 700 million, and then if we do that somewhere like, I'd say like 900 million.
Or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
And then somewhere, let's say 500 million. And then they start to look more like more realistic.
Yeah, now always at the end when you get to some figures, you want to do a gut instinct. So you want to think, America's the biggest market in the world. If I'm coming up with figures of if they're selling 350 million in North America, is it right that they're going to be selling 700 million in Japan? So you might say to the interviewer, this sounds a little high. I might have overestimated, the price or the market share or whatever. But other than that, it was good. You got down to the structure well. Your maths needs a bit of polishing, but you knew what you were doing, and that's the most important thing. You knew how to break down the problem. So, all in all, that's a narrow pass, I guess.
Great.
And I'll post the mark sheet and the answers online.